The International Conference on the Great Lakes region has today held a training in Nairobi aimed at strengthening the response to gender-based violence. The session brought together experts and partners who are focusing on mental health, psychological support and peace building for professionals handling sexual and gender-based violence cases. Participants were urged to ensure coordination in dealing with GBV cases, with speakers calling on the government to fully implement existing GBV policies, especially following the release of the latest femicide report.
And women usually suffer more because of gender-based violence, starting from domestic violence. And I know in Kenya here there were many cases of femicide because we saw protests, which is also encouraging to other countries to be able to stand up and speak about these issues. So when you consider gender-based violence, you need to look at the causes. What are the causes? Some of the causes stem from, abuse of power, whereby you feel that, you have power over somebody. For example, if a woman is economically dependent on a man, then the man sometimes may feel that they can actually abuse that kind of power. Secondly, it stems from gender inequality, right from childbirth. We have challenges when it comes to, preference for the males over the females, and this continues into a person's lifetime. And then of course lack of implementation and knowledge of the law, which is also very important. So going forward, we define gender-based violence as different types. We have the physical, which is obvious, someone beats you. We have the economic, someone says you cannot work because I control you. We have the emotional or psychological, and most times people do not appreciate the psychological, emotional violence, and yet this is very important because it impairs a person's thinking. It also impacts on productivity. So we are here to emphasize that it's very important that much as you may look at the physical, much as you may look at the cuts of what might have happened, it's very important to consider the emotional aspect, whereby a person is traumatized on a daily basis and eventually they blow up, and because of the impact of trauma, which is continuous.
We have seen the changing face of conflict, but we have also realized as much as conflict is changing, women are still at the top as victims. We have technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and I like the question that was asked about whether mental health is still a physical, it has to be manifested physically. However, mental health is also very psychological. You might not see it physically on a person. It's very mental, and part of what is driving that is technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which is part of the reason why this training is very needed when it comes to peace building. And part of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, it also works as an early warning mechanism, as a sign that a conflict is about to escalate, and it therefore gives us a chance to de-escalate issues. So for us in this forum, we're also going to train about psychological first aid. The same way you need a first aid kit in your house, the same way you have first aid steps for anything that happens to you, we also have psychological first aid, which is also part of what we're going to be training during the next 4 days.
They further emphasized the need to strengthen police response systems and expand Policare centers across the country to improve access to timely support and justice for survivors.
Kenya has one of the best policy regimes in terms of SGBV understanding and mitigation. The real issue is implementation of those policies, but also understanding the theaters upon which violence happens. One of the key issues, as she mentioned about femicide, is to recognize that intimate partner violence in Kenya is really a challenge. And this is really violence that happens between people that are intimately connected in relationships. That is the basis upon which a lot of the femicide cases were reported. It's also important to remember that the femicide report is out, so it is really, and the government is working on its implementation. As we do implementation, one of the areas to focus on is police response and strengthening police response, how police receive the cases, strengthening our gender desk, strengthening Policare, and one of the calls really would be to be able to have more Policare centers across the country and strengthen the gender desk so that police are able to respond in a timely manner. From a women, peace and security perspective, Some of the pillars we are dealing with is prevention and asking the question, why is violence happening? One person killed, one person maimed is one too many. So prevention must be at the center of it, because to prevent really is better than to cure. And for prevention, the focus is around the socialization to violence. What is it that makes people accept violence and make it normal and make it the way out of solving issues in a society? You find that socialization is happening either in cultural setups, it's happening where we want to glorify very violent masculinities, it's happening in the school setup. So how do we then address that and minimize the attraction to violence, so that when there's a conflict, people don't automatically think that the only way to solve that issue is to be violent and to maim one another. The other approach is to look at then relief and recovery, to be productive members of society. And today's conversation, today's training is really about that, strengthening psychosocial support, both for the person that faces violence so that they are able to spring back and they are able to be resilient, but also for the person that is offering that service, so that the healers are also healed and are able to offer services from a perspective that then brings wholesome healing to that person that has been violated. So that really is important for Kenya to invest in, as much as we're also saying the systems for response and prevention must be strengthened. We must remember a whole system approach, a whole of government approach, because for a case to get to court, you must look at right from where it enters the criminal justice system. You must look at policing, and that's why we said police response is very important, because the faster we get police response and quality of response, quality of investigation, the easier it is to progress a court in case. The other thing when it comes to the court system then is to look at how do you expedite, and we have case studies of, for example, where we have Policare, then we have seen, because it's a one-stop center approach, we have seen faster redress in the court systems, which then means we can learn an example from that and bring the courts closer to the victims, make access to justice cheaper, so that people do not have to keep going back to court every time, don't have to keep spending a lot of transport to get to court, don't have to use a lot of legal resources that are also very expensive, particularly to the victim.
The International Conference on the Great Lakes region has a declaration called the Kampala Declaration on Sexual Gender-Based Violence of 2011. And one of the resolutions or commitments made by member states, including Kenya, is establishment or scaling up of one-stop centers, recovery centers. And I'm glad to note that Kenya now has the Policare centers, and this is in response to that particular commitment which was made by the different member states, 12 member states of the Great Lakes region. So in this recovery center should be friendly to both men and women, because in some cases we only look at sexual and gender-based violence as affecting women, but men are also affected, and therefore member states are obliged to put in place mechanisms to make it friendly for all categories of people, so that it can cater for both men and women, as well as persons with disability or other marginalized groups such as refugees. Now talking about the cases, another commitment that was made was to fast-track cases of sexual and gender-based violence, whereby you'd have special procedures, or you have special sessions or special courts to be able to handle these cases. Because once a case, for example, of defilement or rape, if it's delayed in the system, the most likely thing is that the person who brings it up or some of the victims lose interest. They are no longer interested in the case, and therefore this case usually collapses. So it's very important that we fast-track these cases, and that when they are being handled, we are responsive to the emotional needs of the person who may be the victim, because such a person may not be able to express themselves because of the trauma. They may freeze and therefore not be able to communicate. So it's very important that the courts are responsive in that manner.